All right, let's kick off this explainer by asking our most foundational question. What is business, really? It's so easy to just shrug and say, well, it's about making money. But the source material we're exploring today reveals something vastly more profound than just a cash grab. At its absolute core, business is this highly dynamic, purposeful activity aimed at fulfilling the actual needs of society by transforming resources into real value. It is a continuous, non-stop cycle of production, innovation, and risk-taking.
Today, we are going on a massive journey to trace the ultimate engine of human progress. We're mapping out how we evolved from, bartering ancient grain and small Neolithic settlements, all the way to navigating today's incredibly complex, AI-driven digital economies. Honestly, it's an unbelievable story of human creativity and sheer adaptability. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, the dawn of trade, followed by the industrial revolutions and the modern business ecosystem. Then we'll unpack supply, demand, and markets, look at the big economic engine, and finally, peek into the age of AI.
Section 1. The Dawn of Trade. Let's go all the way back to the very beginning of human commerce, long before spreadsheets or basic currencies were even a glimmer in humanity's eye.
Think about this timeline for a second. We start 2.5 million years ago with super basic survival tools and hunter-gatherer groups. But the real game changer? That was the Neolithic Revolution around 10,000 BCE, when we finally formed permanent agricultural settlements. And human needs relentlessly drove innovation. By 3000 BCE in Mesopotamia, we literally invented written language, cuneiform, specifically so we could keep track of our trade transactions on clay tablets. By the Iron Age, we were rapidly expanding trade routes and finally dropping coinage into the mix.
Now, early bartering was incredibly painful because of what economists call the double coincidence of wants. Imagine you have grain, but you want clay pots. You had to find a potter who happened to want exactly your grain. What a logistical nightmare, right? That glaring inefficiency naturally forced humanity to invent standardized markets. We moved from primitive bartering to centralized bazaars like the agora in ancient Greece, which allowed for accurate price discovery, brokers, and eventually a reliable common currency. It was our very first real step toward capitalism.
Section 2. The Industrial Revolutions. Fast forward a few millennia, and human commerce essentially straps itself to a rocket ship.
Over just the past 250 years, everything flipped upside down. Each revolution dramatically accelerated what we could do. The first gave us steam power and mechanized factories. The second brought electricity and mass production. Get this, Henry Ford famously shrank his car assembly time from 12 hours down to just 93 minutes. The third wave revolutionized global supply chains through computers and the internet, opening the door for massive disruptors like Amazon. And right now, we are right in the thick of the fourth, driven by artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, and highly automated smart factories.
Section 3. The modern business ecosystem. So, now that we've built this wild, modern, industrialized world, let's pop the hood and see how its structures actually work today. Literally every single job, product, or company you ever interact with falls into a specific chain of value creation. It kicks off at the primary sector, extracting raw resources directly from the earth. Then it moves to the secondary sector, manufacturing those raw materials into finished goods. The tertiary sector handles the services, retail, and banking. And finally, the quaternary sector focuses on pure knowledge, intellectual services, and IT. It is this seamless, uninterrupted link from a miner pulling ore out of the ground all the way to a data analyst writing software code in the cloud.
But here is the thing. No business operates in a bubble. At the center, sure, you have your internal environment, your managers, workers, and entrepreneurs. But circling them like a storm are massive, undeniable external forces. As a business leader, your success depends entirely on how well you can surf those waves. You've got shifting economic conditions, sudden technological leaps, new political regulations, and changing demographics. You have to constantly navigate those external pressures just to survive.
Section 4. Supply, demand, and markets. Let's look at the actual pedals driving prices and production within this dynamic environment.
The historian Thomas Carlyle used to joke, catch a parrot and teach him to say supply and demand, and you have an excellent economist. And honestly, it really is just a constant mathematical tug-of-war, where the consumer's deep desire for lower prices exactly intersects with a business's absolute need to maximize profit. That specific point is what determines the market price of practically everything you buy.
Now, depending on those underlying forces, you'll find yourself competing in one of 4 distinct market structures. Maybe you have zero control over your price in perfect competition, like if you're selling a basic commodity like wheat. Or maybe you're on the total opposite end, operating as a heavily regulated monopoly with total control. But wherever you land, your specific market structure completely dictates your barriers to entry and how you're going to price your stuff long term.
Section 5. The economic engine. Let's zoom way out from individual markets for a second. We need to look at the macro-level systems that societies use to steer the entire ship.
How does a society actually decide who owns what? Well, they use different operational frameworks. You have capitalism with minimal government interference on one side, and communism with state-controlled enterprises on the other, plus socialism sitting in the middle. But realistically, when you look at the global landscape today, almost the entire world operates in a mixed economy. It's a pragmatic blend of private ownership combined with strategic government regulation.
This right here is the absolute heartbeat of economics, the circular flow. It's this continuous, highly dynamic loop. We as households provide our labor to businesses, businesses pay us wages and produce goods, and the government sits right in the middle of it all, facilitating this massive exchange by collecting taxes and providing the public infrastructure we need to keep the whole engine spinning.
But, as we all know, that flow is not a perfectly smooth ride. Enter the inevitable business cycle roller coaster. You feel the accelerating growth during an expansion, you hit the absolute ceiling at the peak, slide all the way down into a contraction, and bottom out at the trough before the painful recovery begins all over again. Every successful leader absolutely has to learn how to anticipate and ride out these phases.
So how do we know exactly where we are on that roller coaster? We look to the ultimate macroeconomic scoreboard, GDP, Gross Domestic Product. It's the total value of everything a nation produces. The critical rule of thumb to remember from our source material is this: if that scoreboard declines for 2 consecutive quarters, we have officially hit a recession.
When tracking that economic health, we also have to watch inflation like a hawk. But remember, the why matters just as much as the what. Is it cost-push inflation, where expensive raw materials and rising wages literally push the final price up at the register? Or is it demand pull, where overwhelming consumer demand radically outpaces supply and prices get pulled up because everyone is rushing to buy the exact same limited goods?
To control those wild swings of inflation and try to smooth out the business cycle, governments will yank on 2 massive policy levers. Fiscal policy is managed through taxation and federal spending, literally injecting cash directly into the economy or pulling it out. Monetary policy, on the other hand, is usually handled by a central bank. They control the actual amount of money circulating, mostly by raising or lowering interest rates to either encourage corporate investment or sharply tap the brakes on runaway inflation.
Section 6. The Age of AI. All right, having mechanized the engine and established the macro rules of the road, where is this multi-million-year journey taking us next?
We are rapidly exiting the 4th Industrial Revolution and diving headfirst into the 5th. We are looking at a wild frontier of biodigital fusion. We're talking deep human-machine collaboration where you work right alongside AI cobots. We've got advanced bioengineering like lab-grown meat and CRISPR, not to mention quantum computing that can solve impossibly complex logistical problems in literal seconds. This era brings up massive debates around conscious tech and sustainable capitalism. Honestly, it might fundamentally redefine what value, commerce, and even work actually mean.
I'm going to leave you with this one final provocative thought from today's explainer. As our economic engine becomes fully autonomous, driven by advanced machine learning and quantum computing, will human labor become entirely obsolete in a post-work society? I mean, the journey from bartering grain to brain-computer interfaces shows just how boundlessly adaptable humanity is. The core rules of supply, demand, and value creation aren't going anywhere for sure. But the real question is, what will be your role in the business world of tomorrow?